Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Tim Moen Show. I'm your host, Tim Moen, broadcasting to you from the bowels of Mordor, Western Canada, but currently under Sauron's rule, I guess you could say. We're trying to figure out what we can do about that. My guest today may have the answer. Cory Morgan recently wrote the book, The Sovereigntist's Handbook, Charting the Course to Western Independence. And we're going to find out all about Canada's history with Western disenfranchisement and the ebbs and flows of the secessionist movements out here in Western Canada. Cory, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for the invite. Oh, always good to chat.
I was reading your book, and one of the things that really struck me was that we've been getting a raw deal right from the start out here in Western Canada. Isn't that right? You know, the thing that stood out.
And I gave some of that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I gave some of that background in the book just to show that, I mean, the system has just been skewed right from the beginning of Confederation to serve Central Canada. It's just the nature of it.
Right. And, you know, you talk in there about how early settlers who moved out here under, I think, the Dominion Act, you know, they were essentially indentured servants, feeding resources back to Ottawa, back to the Laurentian elite in central Canada. Can you talk a little bit about that? What exactly were they required to do?
Sure. I mean, they were fed a bit of a bad deal. I mean, they were offered the free land like we saw in the West, and it was a good deal in that sense. But they got out here and then they discovered that, well, most of the land actually within a good number of miles from any rail line was actually the property of Canadian Pacific Railway. That was part of the deal they cut to build it. So you had to have your homestead a good distance away from the rail line, which back then was, well, if you're moving your goods by horse and wagon, it's a tremendous disadvantage. And then you had to get implements in. You had farm implements, tools. Well, you could get them from Montana far more cost effectively than the ones manufactured in Ontario. But the problem was they'd put a massive tariff on American input. So you were forced to buy your goods at an expanded price from Central Canadian suppliers. And then you had to sell your grain back to Central Canada, and you paid the shipping on the grain out. You paid the shipping on your inputs in, and you paid the shipping on the way. So yeah, indentured servage is a very close statement of what it was. I mean, they did have an opportunity, they did get rolling, but they were at a terrible disadvantage. And the system was set up just to funnel resources into Central Canada. That was just how it was built.
Right. And, you know, I think, as you point out, like at the founding of Confederation, I think you point out in your book that something like 4% of the population lived in Western Canada. And so, you know, it might have made sense back then to more heavily favor, let's say, Central Canada as opposed to the 4% interest out West. But that's not the case anymore. Now we represent something like 30 or more percent. So it might be a time to switch that. But what point during, I guess, since Confederation, have we seen secession, that this sentiment of Western disenfranchised kind of start and grow wings and get organized?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've always had it, always from, you know, Louis Riel until, I mean, it's been a rough, you know, relationship from day one. We had the Social Credit Party that came out of the West. We had the Alberta United Farmers Association Party that came out. All of those were based on regional grievances and an agricultural base, because that's where the bulk of things were at that time. I guess it wasn't really, though, when you were seeing full-blown secessionism coming about, though, until the late 70s, early 80s. The National Energy Program was kind of that final nail in the coffin. That's when it was proven that, hey, when things start to be looking good for you kind of in the West, as it was, because resource prices were up, Alberta, Saskatchewan, they're doing well. Central Canada just changes the rules, pulls the rug out from underneath you, and takes your resources from you anyway. So it really gave a sense of futility to trying to work within the system, and people started to really examine, well, how can we get the heck out of this?
Right. You know, and as an Albertan, I can tell you right now, it certainly feels like we're getting a raw deal. You know, we have these equalization payments that are kind of baked into the Constitution. We have a horrendous amount of income tax from Albertans going into the giant machine in Ottawa there. And then those tax dollars are lorded over our provinces as incentives for doing the bidding of the Laurentian elite, I guess. Again, you talk in the book about healthcare and different things like that. Well, if we want those billions of dollars of healthcare that come out of Albertans' pockets coming back to Alberta to pay for our healthcare, we got to play by the rules Ottawa does. And you mentioned in your book, I think, about Chrétien threatening to pull the rug out from under, withdraw healthcare funding if we start a private MRI clinic and different things like that in the 90s. But all the ways we're getting screwed, Cory, let's enumerate them. And tell me if I'm leaving anything out here. We send all these tax dollars to Ottawa. It gets redistributed to the have-not provinces, and these are usually the provinces that have the most, let's say, socialistic regulations. They have the most prohibitions against developing their own resources. They have the impoverished economies because of what the government's doing. So the relatively free, I guess, province of Alberta that prospers is then funding all these horrible programs in Alberta. And these said same provinces, these have-not provinces, then turn around and refuse to let us get our oil out to market. And cut, they're basically slicing the hand that feeds. I mentioned the healthcare thing. We're basically told as a province how we can administer healthcare in our province. What am I missing? What are some of the other ways that we are aggrieved?
Well, there's lots of ways. Something I go into detail in the book people forget about is bilingual requirements, and that's right. Not. I don't have this big beef about it like some people do, I guess, with a problem with French people. But the thing is, when they imposed it where pretty much every senior civil service position in the country has to be bilingual, you suddenly give Quebec a tremendous advantage on, for starters, getting those jobs to begin with, and then, of course, controlling those areas of government and bureaucracy, whereas they're going to have a natural bias and inclination to make sure those serve Quebec as well, rather than the outlying provinces. The other areas is subsidies, which, you and I as libertarians despise no matter who's giving them out anyways. I don't want to see a bunch of subsidies coming to Alberta industries, but I really don't like seeing the preferential ones being given chronically to Bombardier or SNC-Lavalin, or these companies that by all rights then should be able to stand on their own 2 feet, and we give them money constantly. The list does go on and on. All roads lead to central Canada, and it's still basically just the hangover from the system being set up like that initially. Part of what I try to go into in the book, and I've got to train myself with a bit too, is to not take it so personally and look at the system. It's the system, right? Not the people. Don't get so upset with the people. You can get upset with the politicians, but they're playing the system. Like you mentioned, the healthcare. Right. We saw that in action recently. Premier Smith has been talking tough with Ottawa, but when it came to the transfers of healthcare dollars back to Alberta, she signed the deal, because otherwise, if she doesn't, well, they just won't transfer our own money back to us. And the NDP opposition say, look at that, Daniel Smith throwing away healthcare dollars. We're all suffering. So these premiers out west are forced to dance to the tune of Central Canada, and the system just won't bend.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. Getting mad at that, a lion for being a carnivore or something like that is kind of, a bad take. What you ought to do is just like stay away from them because you're meat, right? Or secede, if you will, from the lion. Like don't go near it, because they're not going to change their nature just because you whine at them or whinge at them or whatever. And maybe we should have that kind of look at Ottawa. I mean, they're kind of a sociopathic machine. It's an institution, right? It doesn't have a soul. It doesn't have a conscience. It wants to grow, and it wants to do that. It doesn't care if it does that at the expense of Albertans, certainly. One of the things that struck at me in your book, and I'm like, why didn't I hear about this? Or maybe I haven't been paying close enough attention. Maybe it's all the pandemic stuff that has been captivating my attention, or the UFOs or whatever's going on. But I completely missed the thing that should have been a huge news story that you point out in your book, that in 2022, we had another look at jurisdictions and seats and ridings in the legislature, and the Quebec population had declined. Meanwhile, out here in the West, our population had increased. So it kind of would have made sense to maybe take a few seats out of Quebec, put them out here in Western Canada to reflect the changing demographics and population. But something else happened. Can you explain to me exactly what happened?
Well, certainly, yeah. I mean, the way the numbers work is there is a formula. It's a pretty straightforward one that do seat redistribution based on the population changes every 5, 6 years or 8 years. I'm not even sure what the terms are, but one had come up, and yes, because of natural migration, the West was going to gain a few seats, but Quebec was going to lose one, and this would not do. The Bloc Québécois and Blanchet, well, hey, again, power to him, standing up for his jurisdiction, said, no, we're not putting up with that. You don't you dare take a seat away from us. And basically put a motion through the House of Commons to say, you're going to make an exception for us, and we're going to keep that seat, even if our population doesn't warrant it. And the thing was, and it passed. It passed very easily. So we don't even have the rep by pop that we were supposed to. The Senate doesn't balance the regions, and nor does the Parliament. And I know it's only one seat, but that principle is a very big one.
Right,
and
but it's a principle, and it's like basically in perpetuity, from what I understand. I mean, Quebec's population is likely to continue to decline given its policies. Ours is likely to increase if we're allowed to have a little bit of freedom out here and prosperity. So when do we get our say in this confederation? But
well, and that's part of what I think creates the true long-term independent supporters and secessionists is when you look at what the Conservatives did. We expect this of the Liberals. We expect this of the NDP. But there was a great number of Conservatives voted for that motion as well. Candice Bergen from Manitoba voted for that motion. Pierre Poilievre found something else he had to do and was absent from the Parliament the day when they voted on that. Virtually only a handful of them actually even voted against this. And that's what people got to realize again. It's the system, it's the machine, and the Conservatives are going to screw you just as quickly as the Liberals will. They just might feel a little bad about it when they do it.
Right. Okay, well, let's kind of shift gears a little bit. We know we're getting a raw deal. This what can we do about this? I mean, but maybe before we talk about what we can do about it, let's talk a little bit about the differences and similarities between Quebec secessionist movements and Western secessionist movement. What's your take on it? Are they basically the same? Do they have the same grievances, or are they kind of built around different ideas?
Very different ideas. I mean, Quebec, it's very much more cultural, linguistic, a strong association, with the Quebecois. And it's always what it's been. I mean, their movement has been basically going since the War of 1812. And they have it. It bonds them very tightly. Right. And as I've said in the book as well, they're still working towards it. Some people, if they think that Quebecers don't really want to go, they do. They just know that they have to get the right circumstances to get into another referendum. That's why, as you said, they don't mind the population draining out as long as it's non-French population draining out. Because if they can get that balance and that linguistic tie, they feel they don't care about the financial aspect or things like that, just as long as they can have their own French-speaking nation. And there used to be a much stronger Catholic element among that as well. I don't think that's as much of a tie today as it was in the older days. In the West, it's definitely much more focused on finances and individualism and freedoms. And so it's a different thing. And that makes it more difficult for us. We don't have that tie that binds us quite like a language would. It's still just as strong an issue, but it is most definitely different from how it is in Quebec.
Yeah, I mean, the way someone described it to me once is that Quebec secessionism is somewhat aspirational, right? Like they have a target they're aiming at. It's like a positive aspiration in terms of we're proud of our culture. This is who we are, and this is who we proudly exert ourselves to be. And out here, it's just like, leave us the hell alone. Like, it's kind of like the difference between going to like a church service or how, like out here, it's a bunch of atheists saying, no, don't impose your dumb state religion on me. It's kind of that thing. So you're right. I think it makes it harder to organize around that. You don't see a lot of atheist churches popping up because it's kind of like herding cats. So, libertarianism is, I think, similar in that way as well. It's like we have this attitudinal disposition of skepticism towards the state and the government. We say, no, we don't think you have the right to do the things you're doing. Those claims are extraordinary, like screw off kind of thing. But our philosophy is all built around what not to do. Don't hurt people. Don't take their stuff. Don't, initiate force, respect property rights. But it doesn't tell us what to do, right? Like, I don't know, then, okay, don't do all those sins, but now where do I point my life? How do I live? And so we all are very different, diverse individuals, all have different things to do. That's not a really easy philosophy to kind of organize around, because we're organizing around what not to do. And it's kind of like Western independence is like, well, we don't know what we want to do, but we definitely don't want that. We definitely don't want those guys telling us what to do. That's what we don't want. But what do we want, right? And that makes it a little bit harder to organize.
Yeah, and that's how I try to at least lay it out and define it a bit in the book, and getting on to organizing. I mean, you kind of hit upon it too. And as a libertarian leader, you would know that we're talking about the worst herd of cats to try and hold together. The second worst is a bunch of independence-minded people. I mean, keep them in the same room for more than half an hour.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. And we've seen these parties come and go. And I know I founded one. I ran it into an election.
Right.
We fell apart. I took a part in other ones, and right now I think there's about 5 different registered independents leading provincial parties in Alberta right now, and they're all in the sub 1% support category. I mean, the Wilders Independence Party was kind of getting along, and then all of a sudden they blew up into infighting, and they've fallen off the map. We've got to stop spawning these parties. That's not the way it's going to have to work.
Yeah.
We're going to have to work as individuals. The parties are an element, but you can't have an independence party. It's just not going to work. We've done it enough times. We should have figured that out by now.
Right. So I think in the book you talk about, it almost seems like spreading the ideas, getting a movement going. I mean, ultimately it's going to have to be whichever party or government we have in power that's going to have to lead the way on this. We have the legislative tool called the Clarity Act that we can use to secede if we want. And let's just walk through that for a second. It's 50% plus one at least on a very clear question given to Albertans, a very clear referendum question to separate. And then there's a few other things I want to talk about in that Clarity Act as well. But is it total number of voters or just the people that vote in the referendum that you need the 50 plus one? Is that wasn't really clear to me.
Yeah, as far as I know, it is the total number of voters. Though, I mean, that could be one of the ways people could argue against an outcome if it was, say, just a 51 or 55%. I sort of say that in the book, too. If they want to go and you want it to happen, it should be solid. We're talking 60%. You've got to be sure that there's not ambiguity with this. Right. I do believe, from my interpretation, that means the 50% plus one of those who came out to vote.
Okay. Well, that's, and I'm sure that other people against it, other parties against it might argue a different interpretation of that. And then as I read the act, it leaves me a little bit crestfallen because there's some other things in there about significant engagement in hearing those jurisdictions or people that have a claim against secession. So it strikes me that, maybe First Nations would, maybe a neighboring province would, I don't know who else would, sovereign citizens or something like that. I don't know who else would have a claim against it. But it seems to me once you clear that one really giant hurdle of getting the referendum done, they have different ways of screwing you out of seceding anyways. What's your take on that?
Yeah, it could end up a lot like Brexit, where, you had the vote, but the process of actually getting there just turns into a muddied, mired mess. I would hope ideally, if and when the time comes, it's been a very good, solid, strong vote. But still, if you have 40% of people voted against, that's a significant chunk of the population. If it is First Nations, I do address that in the book, but it's still sticky, absolutely. But the main thing is, if you had 60% of the province vote, this province or Saskatchewan or wherever for that matter, saying we want out, we've had it. You've just sent a whiplash through this confederation like it hasn't seen since 1867. Like, we might have finally the recipe, though, where the other provinces will come to the table and say, okay, maybe we can rewrite the agreement. Maybe we can finally, it's gotten too far. This is the point. We can get serious, not Meech Lake, not Charlottetown. We're actually going to redraft some stuff and change it. Right. Because that's what we really need in the end. But I don't see any other means to get those changes done until, at the very least, a positive vote has come. And possibly still fighting all the way through a few years after the vote to an actual secession. Right. But the first step is getting that vote.
Yeah. And what are some of the lessons we can learn from other, secessions or you talk about Brexit. I think in the book you mentioned Norway and Sweden. What are some of the other, historical examples? I mean, obviously we have our neighbors to the south who seceded from us and the British monarchs, so to speak, through revolution. That seems like, it would be better not to engage in bloodshed if we can help it. What are some lessons we can learn from other places?
I think that the violent approach, I mean, I don't think it's in us out here. I haven't seen indications of it, and I'm happy for that. That's fine. The FLQ failed in Quebec. If anything, it unified the country more with the horrors of what they did. And the American Revolution had a much better basis and need than at least a more immediate one than we do.
Yeah.
But lessons to be learned is just that it can be done. It can be done with a developed modern country. So Sweden and Norway did do it. I used that example, even though that was over 100 years ago. It was through referendum. There was a lot of hurt feelings at the time. It was tense. But since then, they are a couple of the most united yet independent countries you could imagine. They have open borders. They are a very tight relationship, but still maintain their independence from each other. It can work. Because some people say, BC would never talk to Alberta. No, I don't believe that for a second.
Yeah.
And then a more recent one, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. They call that one the Velvet Revolution. And it was kind of phased out over time, and the two split. They had been held together by the Soviet Union, so it was kind of an artificial union to begin with. But still, there's a lot of overlap in those countries as well. And they're managing. They're still close with each other. They're not fighting with each other. They're not warring, but they've maintained their independence, and they're valuing it.
Yeah, I mean, I might not like my neighbor very much if he lived under my roof, right? And we had like different values and kind of, didn't get along, and we'd rub each other the wrong way after a while. But the fact that we have a fence between us, he goes to his house, I go to mine, we shake hands, we work together on fences and neighborhood projects. We get along just famously, even though we're not living under the same roof. And I have to believe that there's something to that idea of strong fences make good neighbors or something like that.
Well, yeah, and I think part of the issue is authoritarians feel the way to bring about unity is to crack down and mash everybody together, is to force it, to fight it. And I believe that's like sticking, two polar magnets together. You can fight it, but they're still going to want to push apart. The irony of it is the way to unity is to decentralize the power so you can have the differences within the regions and still be close to each other. I mean, I go a lot into Switzerland, of course, which is a small nation with 26 cantons, 4 official languages. If you believe decentralized authoritarian, you'd think, well, that country should have shattered in 26 pieces 30 years ago. But actually, there's no such thing as a secessionist movement in Switzerland.
Right. And it's landlocked, and it's, you go through in the book all the different arguments against secession, from we would be landlocked to how would we engage in national defense to, we would be economically disadvantaged because we wouldn't be as big a negotiating bloc or something like that. So you kind of dismantle all these arguments in your book. Okay, let's get back to what's the path forward then. We were convinced, Cory, that we this is the path we want to embark on. This is a worthy cause. What do we got to recruit Chris Sky to come to Alberta and lead a movement of civil disobedience and rally the troops and just plant a flag and say, this is Chris Sky land now, and we no longer recognize Ottawa, or what? Yeah,
well, I mean, that's what I don't want or see is particularly Mr. Sky, though he's a colorful character. Don't wait for a messiah. It's not going to be a person who's going to come and lead it there. That this book is, I frame it as a training manual. Not everybody is a political activist lunatic like myself. That's why I give those answers, because if they're doing the water cooler discussion or this family dinner discussion, they don't necessarily have a ready answer to the whataboutisms that start coming about against it. So this helps train them so they can answer rationally and not get into a fight, because I think we're going to win that support on the ground. We are going to win it at the family gathering, at the water cooler, at work, at the hockey game, all sorts of places, at the bar, over time, and win the individuals. And the other part is we've got to get active. I mean, only 2% of the country typically has a membership in any political party. I mean, that's pathetic. But I mean, part of it is nobody knows how. I never got taught in school, how do you even join a party? How do you take out a membership? How does a nomination work? What's a constituency association? I take that for granted because I hang around with a bunch of partisans all the time. But most people, they don't have any idea what that is, and nobody told them. And it can even be intimidating. Like, you don't want to join a group if you don't even know what's involved. So there's a large chapter on how to join a party and how to take part, whether just as a member who goes to meetings or whether you want to join the board and really get involved. Right. And that's what I'm hoping. Build that a stronger party support and get more people working on the ground, making a rational case. Having F Trudeau flags flying on hockey sticks on a truck is very personally satisfying, but you're not winning any converts that way. You got to get on the ground and start converting people one by one.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, that to me is, if we follow the idea that government is kind of downstream from culture or ideas that culture has, and politicians kind of get in front of the parade, regardless of who created that parade and which direction it's going, it's the politician's job to get in front of it. Then what we have to do is create some movement, a parade going in one direction, pushing towards sovereignty. And I like that you don't kind of lay out this is step 1, 2, 3, and 4, what we have to do. It's kind of like, listen, arm yourself with knowledge, know how to be persuasive and talk about these issues. And then wherever you go, whether it's in a fringe political party, whether it's in a mainstream political party, whether it's at the dinner cooler, whether it's, starting a book club or maybe just even a groundswell movement where you're going around, speaking about sovereignty, wherever you're at, that knowledge is going to help you. And quite frankly, we need people all across the board. Like I see a real value in having people in the UCP pushing towards sovereignty, kind of quietly behind closed doors, of course, because if you're a respectable politician and want to stay in power, you can't say these things out loud very easily. You have to be very careful, but I still want those people in there. Let the fringe political parties, like in my case, the Libertarian Party, that was my job. It was to clear the Overton window, remove some brush, make it safer for the more mainstream parties. And, the Libertarian Party kind of made it safe for Maxime Bernier to run as a libertarian in the CPC party and create a quasi-libertarian, pseudo-libertarian party called the PPC that did some positive things in that direction. But unless you have those fringe parties kind of willing to go out there, sacrifice themselves and cut that. So whatever, guys, look at your own situation, look at your own kind of personality and what you're attracted to. And hey, go wherever you're comfortable, wherever you think you could be most influential, and get this book. And the book is called The Sovereigntist Handbook, Charting the Course for Western Independence. Its author is Cory Morgan. You can get it at Amazon and other bookstores. Cory, anywhere else, anything else you want to talk about? Where can they get the book? Where can they follow you?
Sure. Well, yeah, and we sell directly at gvlbooks.com. So, I mean, if a person wants to go that route. But of course, if you got a good deal with Amazon Prime, you can save on some shipping. Get on there, search it out. You can find it. And the digital version is on there, of course, too. Versus the hard copy. And well, just as for following me, I'm pretty easy to find. Just Google Cory Morgan, and you'll see either somebody writing on why I'm an arsehole, or you'll see.
I have to say your Twitter account is one of the more entertaining ones out there that I follow. So definitely give Cory Morgan a follow. I'll put those links down below, guys, to his book and to his Twitter account. And Cory, thanks for coming on the show and talking about this really important topic.
Oh, always great to talk to you, Tim.
Beautiful.